Welcome to Films and Stuff with your hosts, Pete Mitchell and Ethan Hunt.
Hi, everybody. Welcome back to Films and Stuff podcast. I'm Ethan, very enthusiastic to introduce my partner in crime, Pete. Hey, Pete.
How are you, Ethan?
Good. Let's call this a TV roundup episode. What do you say?
I love it. That's a great idea. We haven't had a chance to really just catch up on all the stuff we're watching.
Historically, we've called this a ramble, but let's rebrand it as a TV roundup. Sounds a little bit more organized, but as always, we are prone to a few tangents, and we've got a bunch of stuff that we've been watching recently. Should we just summarize what we have, or just list out what we have and just take them one by one?
Absolutely. So we briefly talked about The Boys last week.
That's right.
And The Acolyte last week.
That's right.
Both of which are running concurrently. And then in terms of quote unquote new shows, and we say new not to indicate that they've just come out, but new as in they're new to us.
New to us.
Of course, we had House of the Dragon, which also started last week. At the time of recording the next episode 2 is going to drop in a day from now.
Yes.
Then we have a show that you introduced me to called The Veil.
You're welcome.
Indeed. And then there's another show which is not new, but everybody and their mother was talking about it a couple months ago when it first dropped, but we're only now getting to it, Shogun.
That's right.
And then we haven't even talked about Outer Range yet because neither of us has seen it yet. We didn't get a chance. And also, This is really not on Ethan. This is not on Pete. This is on Amazon. The show came out a while ago. Amazon should have done a better job of making sure everybody knows that it had come out a while ago.
Absolutely. I have to say, it's really disappointing because all the things that Amazon is shoving down my throat, they're not showing me the one show that I want to see that I've given very high ratings. It's really confounding.
Yeah, it's quite silly, to be honest.
So I didn't watch Outer Range yet, so I'm not sure if we could. Let's put that aside till next time.
That'll be on our back burner. Let's put it that way.
Yep. I also want to start The Queen, a Bridgerton story on Netflix. I know.
You've drank the Bridgerton Kool-Aid, hey?
I have slammed the Bridgerton Kool-Aid. Let's start with Acolyte, and then let's contrast it with Shogun, if you don't mind. Can we do that?
That's interesting. That's actually a really interesting take. Let's talk about the Acolyte very briefly because A, we talked a little bit about it already, and B, it seems to be mired in all sorts of controversy.
Muck. Yeah.
So where are we on this? Now that you've caught up on it, where are you on this mentally?
I mean, mentally, I would say this is not a great show. I love Star Wars, and anything somehow connected to Star Wars is still really important for me to see. Mm-hmm. The show, I would say, is a lot of really empty calories. I'll start comparing it to Shogun when we start talking about Shogun, but it's very short episodes. This episode 4, I think, was only 27 minutes.
Yeah.
They go super fast. They bounce from theme to theme very quickly without any depth or exploration. I certainly don't love any character. I could maybe be convinced to kind of like a few. Nothing interesting is happening in the action, in the plot, anything. But of course, they do throw in some Jedi magic. And in this episode, particularly at the end, which kind of makes it worthwhile. But overall, they are not well done for a Star Wars IP franchise.
So I'm going to take a little bit of a harsher tack. And I think, we've talked about how we've generally been favorable to the entertainment industry. But in this regard, I don't know, man. I'm quite disappointed in the entire thing. I think pacing in episode 4 was all kinds of wrong. I thought they tried to do this cliffhanger ending that wasn't earned. I felt like the whole episode just felt a bit meh. And it reaffirmed my thing that I'm pretty sure I'm not going to continue watching this until the end of the season. And even then, I'm
Yeah.
doubtful if you put a lightsaber to my throat and said, "Hey, are you going to continue watching this after the season's done?" I think I would say it's a skip right now. In fact, I've already marked it down as a skip on our notes. I think it would need a lot of work
Yeah.
before it gets to a mooch.
Look, you're right about a few things. The pacing is deplorable. It's really shocking to me how bad the pacing is. It's shocking to me how these characters are so inconsistent. No one is compelling. But the real tragedy, I think, of this series is that actually the stakes are very high. I think in all the mess, we've lost how high the stakes are. And the stakes are that the Sith, apparently, are alive and well. And the Jedi have absolutely mismanaged this situation, both from a strategic perspective. And I think that's glossed over in that historically, actually, the stakes are really, really high. We've identified that there might be a Sith. And if you go back, and I've watched this episode twice now, because when you go back to kind of that, as with everything, Jedi, you have to stand around like some type of round table that shows a battlefield, right?
Yeah.
So they're standing around their round table watching this video of May fight. I don't know where they got that video from, but apparently they're watching her and they're like, oh, she must have been trained by a Jedi. And then they said, do you think this is like I can't remember if they used the word faction or something else. And I thought the something else referred to the Sith. And then they were saying, hey, should we inform the Jedi Council? And someone said, well, no, because then the Jedi Council will inform the Senate. And then this is really going to reflect poorly on us and it's going to show mistrust. I mean, this is a great example of how the Jedi have just kind of mismanaged themselves into extinction over the course of, I don't know how many centuries we're talking here, that there's a clear problem here. 2 of their own have been assassinated. Don't get me started if that's even realistic. And they're sweeping this under the rug, send the most conflicted person to go check it out with a group that he's assembled that are the most unqualified people to be actually assigned to this mission. It's gross mismanagement by the Jedi, which actually I think is a really good story, right? If you think about this, they've mismanaged themselves into extinction. And it's a great story that should be told, saying, hey, these are very, very spiritually powerful, good-hearted people that just happen to be really bad at management. They're not a management. They're the opposite of the Empire, which is very, very good at management, but they're very, very bad people and have a bad mission. And that's the great good versus evil that I think is being overlooked here.
I think there's a little bit of what you're saying, which is bureaucracy, right? Like this whole thing about the council and following rules and following order, which, by the way, it's a required thing, but at the same time, like, it's inept bureaucracy, as it were, right? I feel like the Empire, especially in episodes 4, 5, and 6, we saw them operating at like peak bureaucracy, right? And even in Andor, we get to see them.
Yeah, in Andor, we see what a smooth operating machine the Empire is, right?
Right, and to the extent where they're arrogant, but they're also thorough. Yeah. Whereas here, the Jedi Council is arrogant, but they're not being thorough about it, right? In Andor, when we talked about arrogance, they were just like, fine, send over the right people to get that, to look at that thing and that issue and have someone doggedly search after them. Here, they're sending the wrong people. I have qualms about that, by the way.
You mean about sending Sol and Osha?
Exactly. I feel like that's the first rule is if you have a conflict of interest, you hire an independent auditor, right? You don't,
I agree.
you don't, like in any business, you don't ask the captain of your precinct to investigate your precinct. You have internal affairs. You have an independent auditor come and do something.
I agree. It's actually really frustrating because again, I like the storyline that, hey, the Jedi are really good people. They're just so good and simple that they're not able to actually organize themselves, and their absence of the ability to organize themselves is actually their downfall. But here, this bureaucracy is just totally nonsense. That everyone identifies a conflict of interest. They're saying, "Hey, Sol, we've cracked the mystery. This person, who we've now identified who it is from a video, I don't know how they got it, wants to kill 4 people. You're one of the 4. Okay, let's go track her down. Let's go try to save the 3rd, but let's send you to do it," which is basically compounding your risk. Okay, you need a team. Let's give you a civilian who is also conflicted, and it's her sister. And let's give you this ragtag group of people that all have their own like emotional issues, none of whom are acting, except like the blonde lady with the horns, none of whom actually act like Jedi. It's really disappointing, right?
Yeah, again, I think it's just arrogance. And to be fair, it's also, I mean, the show takes place 100 or 200 years before the prequels. So it could just be inexperience. Who knows? Look, there's a lot of things, but that's a story issue, right?
That's a story. Yeah, that's a story issue.
That's not a series issue. That's a story issue. If you want to look at that as a narrative issue, that's not a foundational issue. Let's talk about some of the foundational issues. We touched upon pacing, which has been awful.
When we say pacing, do we mean the same thing? Because what I mean is we have a character that we've spent 2 or 3 episodes trying to understand their motivations. And then in the next scene, we see them totally flip without any clear justification or event.
Immediately.
Kind of flip their motivations.
Immediately. I've killed 2.
Yeah.
I'm going to kill the 3rd. Oh, you know what?
Oh, wait.
Let's scrap the whole
that.
mission. I don't need to do this. My sister is alive. This is all nonsense. What are you talking about? So that's one problem. That might also be a narrative issue, but I mean, that does affect pacing because there's no build up to that. There's no, you don't spend an episode going into the mentality of why that flip happens. It just happens almost unprompted.
Yeah.
As you said, this is a 26-minute show on Disney Plus where you don't have the limitations of time. It ended on a cliffhanger that made no sense. It's just, there's so many things about it that didn't work for me on that. The writing is awful. I mean, it is god awful. The Jedi are good.
The dialogue.
The Jedi are bad. That's, you know what I mean? Like, that's George Lucas levels of awful dialogue. And it was quaint for episodes 4, 5, and 6 in the 70s and 80s and the 90s.
Yeah.
It is no longer quaint. It is no longer acceptable now. We should strive for better. And then the PR disaster that is what's going on at Lucas on a much more, let's say, macro level is unbelievable.
What is happening?
The writers or the producers or the management team, whoever it is, I'm not pinning this down on a single person because at the end of the day, Lucas is part of Disney. It's a juggernaut. They're a PR machine. But instead of just acknowledging that, you know what, maybe this show isn't so far up to snuff and certainly the fans aren't happy. And by fans, I do mean the hardcore fans. I'm not talking about the average viewer. You and I are not the average Star Wars viewer. But at the same time, we are also some of the easiest people to please.
Yeah.
It doesn't take a lot to please us, and it would take a lot to piss us off. And somehow, like for me anyway, I feel like this is a slap in the face. And instead, the PR machine is saying, if you've got a problem with the Acolyte, the problem is you, not the Acolyte. and they're going after reviewers, they're going after YouTubers, they're going after critics, they're going after all of everybody else. They're not looking inwards, they're going on attack. I think it's awful for them to then turn around and say, you know what the problem with this show is? If Ethan and Pete don't like this show, it's because they're both idiots. It's because they're both racist. It's because they're both sexist and misogynists and whateverists. It's not because the writing is bad. It's not because the show is bad. The show is perfect. You're the problem.
That's disappointing to hear. I mean, I think first things, you should be strong enough as a studio, particularly with Star Wars fans, which are a fickle bunch.
Yeah.
I would suggest that you will actually never get the diehardest of Star Wars fans to buy into anything that you do. And that's because 4, 5, and 6 were so superb and unique and from a different era that you just cannot capture that lightning in a bottle again.
Yeah.
The best you can do is try to make something kind of compelling, like Andor, that nibbles away at the edges, and at least you give more context to a good story and you try to have it be faithful to the original vision. And the Acolyte, again, not knowing anything about this series, now that I see the potential of it, it could have been a really great story in terms of how the Jedi kind of mismanaged the situation. Anything else really about the storyline is not at all compelling to me. From the witches and the magic to the identical twin sisters, to the fire, to the one sister, apparently for 16 years doing nothing but training with maybe a Sith. We don't know anything else. It's just nonsense. I don't like the story.
I'm not a fan of the narrative. I'm not a fan of the direction. I'm not a fan of the writing. I'm not a fan of pacing. There's a lot of problems I have with it. And Disney, if you're listening, it's not me. It's you. I know this sounds like a breakup.
It's not a breakup. It's just, I was watching the scene in the forest and there were so many things that bothered me about it. First, who is the dude who looks like Ezra Miller? He used to be the guy who made that cocktail of poison, and then he's guiding May through the forest.
Oh, yeah. Yes, I know who you're talking about. Yeah.
He looks like Ezra Miller, right?
Kind of does.
Yeah. That guy. I feel like I'm being intentionally misled. There are so many signs that he is actually the Sith.
I think he's the Sith guy as well. I think he's the guy behind the mask.
I've got two problems with that. One, why are you shoving it down my throat that he is that guy? Give it a little bit of suspense and let me try to figure it out. But why in episode 4 are you really shoving it down my throat so much? Secondly, I actually don't think he's the guy. I think that it's just like this dramatic misdirection. Like, it's so obvious, it seems like a red herring.
Sure.
I don't like either one of those things, you know? Like, I'm not going to be happy with either outcome. If he ends up being the guy, there's no mystery. You've basically, like, subliminally written it, you know, on the screen time and time again. This is the guy.
Yeah, exactly.
This is the guy. But I feel like it's so obvious that they're trying to get me to believe this, that, like, there's going to be a reveal and he's not the guy. And I'm, as an audience member, to be, no way. I thought for sure he was the guy, right? I want it to be subtle. I want us to have like legitimate debate. And I don't think we need to have this reveal in episode 4. I think we can wait. I don't like that I'm not clear who's powerful and who's not powerful. The Wookiee, who is a Jedi, which is fine to have Wookiees be Jedis, right? This is in the lore. How does he die so easily?
Off screen,
like he's
by
just
the
sitting
way.
in his chair. Yeah, off screen, by the way. This just drives me nuts. Jedis are powerful or not powerful. They've got this sense of when they're in danger. Or they don't have a sense in danger. Here's Osha. Oh, I feel things. I get things. I'm starting to get my senses back, right? And yet,
a whole group of Jedi gets pushed by one force push. What are you talking about? Including a Jedi Master.
Problem number 2, green lightsabers? I thought the green lightsaber was reserved for Luke.
I know what you mean.
So anyway, this is not a must subscribe. unless you're really a Star Wars fan and you like it. It is maybe for someone like you and me, it's more of a mooch. For anyone else, my brother, my sister, my mom, this is a skip or a mooch.
I go one step further. It's not just not a must subscribe. I think for fans, even for your hardcore fans, this is a skip or at best a mooch. Right now, I'm at a skip. It could theoretically work itself up to a mooch, but I doubt very much it'll be able to salvage the back half of the season into a must subscribe.
Look, as a show, yes, but I have to say, I mean, you and I are going to watch it because I think as part of the Star Wars universe, it's important to see it through to the end. I would expect something important is going to happen. It may be totally nonsense. It may be irrelevant. It may make us have a 2-hour, rant session, but something important will come out of this. So I think from that perspective, it's probably a must subscribe. As a television show and a work of art, it is a skip. If someone went to the University of Southern California film school and there was a lecture on character development 101, this show doesn't follow any of those rules. If there is a course titled Character Dialogue 101, absent that day. Pacing 101, ignored. And it's not we're special, we don't have to follow, kind of like the basic, entertainment rules. Those don't apply to us. Kind of, if you're Back to the Future. But when you're on Disney Plus now, and you're trying to have something that's universally liked, yeah, you should probably follow some basic rules.
The Acolyte to Star Wars is what She-Hulk was for the MCU for me. I think this is the show that's broken my back. Because remember, I used to watch everything MCU related just because you felt like you had to if you wanted to be a part of the MCU club. And that's how most of us feel about Star Wars. But man, this show has really tested my inner strength about this. And I don't know if I can make it through.
Can I make a dramatic pivot and change of topic at the same time staying on the topic? In contrast to The Acolyte on Disney Plus, we have now watched Shogun, which is a remake of a Japanese-inspired drama. Shogun, I've watched the first episode, you've watched the first 2. It is dramatically different than The Acolyte in the sense that it is very slow and it uses that to develop its characters.
Yes, 100%. It's very deliberate in its pacing.
It's very deliberate, saying we're not in a rush to have big reveals. We're not in a rush to get everything out of the way. We want you to get to know these people, their motivations, and why they are how they are. This is the big setup. Tell me how you felt after watching the first 2 episodes.
Man, it's already feeling like a must subscribe to me. I know it's a bit early doors.
Yeah.
First of all, the intrigue, amazing. In terms of narrative, the structure of the story and the narrative, loved it. I thought that was really, really well done. Yeah. From what I understand, this is also loosely based on real life and history, obviously dramatized. The way they've structured the story, I think, is not just respectful, but when I say respectful, I don't mean to the history of Japan, which I'm sure it is. Respectful of my time, which is to say, hey, look, we're going to be slow, but we're going to make that pacing pay off.
It's the details and the amount of time, and it is primarily in Japanese with subtitles, but it is the small nuggets of information that are revealed in conversations that are so gratifying from what I watched in the first episode, that you see people's thought process, you see the long game, you see the chess match, and that is really so compelling to me. And again, that's why I use that to contrast against The Acolyte, which I feel like is just like shoving it in my face. Like, hey, I'm a good guy now. And you're going to know I'm a good guy because I've just said the following line.
Yeah.
I'm a good guy now. There's no enjoyment from being told what to think. The enjoyment is extrapolating from subtle conversations why people are doing things or what is happening, you know?
Yeah, and there's no hand holding. That's the beauty of it. There was something in the first episode that I didn't understand, and the thread of that continues into the second episode, and I didn't understand the strategic purpose of that happening. And they say one simple line, and where you're just like, oh, that makes perfect sense now. That's a great idea. It wasn't ham-fisted at all. So even though it is mentioned in dialogue why something happens, you're just like, okay, that makes total sense. And I appreciate that you didn't hold my hands and then literally jam it in my face.
I don't know much more we need to say about it because I think we got our point across, which is it is a much slower paced show. It is about subtle dialogue. And some of this is, you know, kind of like the perception of Japanese culture where, you know, people are also a little bit more reserved and cautious. And
it's a little bit like Tokyo Vice in that regard. Yeah.
Yeah, it is.
Also deliberate, also a bit slow, but very good drama. And when there's action, it's good action.
And it frustrates me, though, again, when I compare it to The Acolyte, both on Disney Plus, that's a good point, which is, you know, The Acolyte doesn't have to rush. They could be doing dramatically less and having more meetings between, you know, Jedi Council members around, you know, that round table, in corridors, in hallways. They could make a very, very powerful show. It could probably even cost less than what they're paying now to show all these hyperdrive scenes and do all this, you know, this flying monster and all these other, you know, like action sequences. They could probably do this for much less and get more bang for their buck. Shogun, which has a huge ensemble, you know, all the sets, I mean, are so
beautiful. I mean, really just stunning.
Beautiful and ornate to come up with. They make the most of the scenes where they're just two people and you've got a tight shot of them speaking to each other, you know, and the background could be nothing. It could be trees. It could be, you know, kind of like the wall of a house or something. I think that in terms of being tasteful and creative, Shogun is on just an entirely different level.
I would 100% agree with you.
Can I pivot again? So we've said Acolyte, fine. Shogun, fantastic. Getting into must-subscribe territory. Something that I would think would be stylistically similar to Shogun is House of the Dragon. In the sense that they're not sci-fi. They're both kind of gritty, dirty costumes. I mean,
medieval era looking, one being fictional and one being real.
Yes. House of the Dragon is fictitious, but generally, you know, the same production in terms of everything needs to be new, make sure there's no car tracks, you know, no modern dress, so on and so forth, right?
No Starbucks cup on the dining table.
Exactly. In that sense, they're very, very similar. House of the Dragon, I think, is compelling to me, having watched episode 1 of season 2. Highly, highly anticipated. What did you come away from? Like, you came away saying season 2 is going to be blank.
I gotta say, look, I think it's going to be great, but I gotta say, I was a bit meh about the first episode.
Yeah.
I was not feeling...
Let me say this hot take. Tell me if you agree. House of the Dragon is not standing on its own 2 feet. It is still riding on the goodwill and the coattails of Game of Thrones. And that as much as we want to really get into this series, it's kind of falling flat. But we all love Game of Thrones seasons 1 through 7 so much. And we love the idea of dragon fights that we're still kind of giving it a pass and saying it's great, but nothing actually about it is great.
I
Agree or disagree with that hot take?
I I hate to agree. I hate to agree in the sense that I don't know how much of it is riding on coattails, but it's certainly, you're right. It is certainly a reputational win. People I
Yeah.
think are watching it for Game of Thrones related reasons and maybe not House of the Dragon related reasons. I walked
Yeah.
away from episode one thinking, man, this is going to feel like a slog. And I think it's because we're gearing up to another war. And Game of Thrones ended with that literal war. And it was just it was tiring, right? Not just emotionally, it physically was tiring to watch.
Let me give an analogy. Do you remember like when we were in grade school and you had to write an essay and you start writing, and then you like read what you've wrote and you're like, oh crap, I've kind of boxed myself into this answer.
Yeah.
I gotta go forward with this answer. I've already committed myself to it,
Yeah.
right? And you're like, I've got nothing really left, but I've got to like expand this last point somehow and make it work, right? I feel like that's what House of the Dragon has done. Like it's kind of like they filmed like the first few episodes of season one, and they're like, oh crap, we kind of made that go too fast, or we've lost this character. We've made this character do this. How are we going to make this survive another 5 seasons? Because now we've already kind of like boxed ourselves in. They lost the series too soon. They lost the younger Rhaenyra too soon. They escalated to Matt Smith, marrying his cousin too soon. We've had all these things happen so fast in the first half of season one, and now we're kind of stuck with what we've got. And any move is going to kind of be like a checkmate, I feel. Like I knew Aemond was not going to die in this episode. Why? Because that's the end of it. That's the end of the war. If Aemond dies, there's no one else strong on that side. We saw it in the small council meeting.
Yeah.
They're totally dependent on Aemond being strong, being loyal, having the hugest dragon. Once he's off the board, and what a silly plot as well. I mean, by the way, not a particularly strong plan. That's all it takes is Matt Smith saying, hey, I'm going to bribe this guy who seems to be a gambler, doesn't have any ability to win in hand-to-hand combat. You just sneak into the castle, find the guy's bedroom, and like take the guy down. Aemond? Come on. Like Matt Smith couldn't even beat Aemond, when they were jousting or sword fighting, right? So
the way I'm looking at it is I feel tired not having watched any of the other episodes because obviously they're not out. And I already feel tired that there's going to be 4 more seasons of this going ahead.
Season 1 went too fast. Season 1 should have been spread out over seasons 1 and 2. And now you're talking. We didn't get nearly enough time, with Alicent and Rhaenyra as kids, with Viserys and Alicent married.
Yeah, we ended with
and
a
now
war.
we're boxed in that we can't lose anyone. No one can die now because that's basically a checkmate.
Which means that we're going to get 3 seasons or 4 seasons of them fighting, which is what I mean about that being tiring.
I'm really disappointed with House of the Dragon. Again, comparing it to Shogun, the things that made Game of Thrones so great, the subtleties, so many different locations, so many different families, right? We focused on so many different things. Why isn't each side kind of going out into the countryside and recruiting houses kind of one by one? Those are all great standalone episodes that can make for a longer and try to understand, okay, we're at a stalemate. We can't go dragon on dragon. We've got to do this, through the ground. We've got to recruit all the houses. We're going to go south. They're going to go north. We got to go faster than they go. Like, why not like set the stakes and show me what is the plan and who are the important houses, introduce me to new houses. The Red Keep is very, very insulated right now. The storylines are not compelling. Dragonstone is very, very insular right now. And it's very dark. The whole thing is dark. Where are my loyalties? Who am I sympathetic for? Who am I cheering for? Is there a bad guy that we secretly kind of root for? Like Jaime Lannister? Who's our little jester? Where are we here?
And look, to be fair, it's only the first episode. There's going to be more. Maybe there isn't. I don't know. It's still very early doors.
Pete, that's right. It's early doors, but come on. The first episode of the second season is the one where it should like blow your mind and be like, whoa. That's the time when, like you could do the skip jumps. That's when you can kind of reframe everything and put it in perspective. Okay, this is what we've got now. We didn't really do that. We just kind of like went back to the muck. Compelling? Must subscribe?
I mean,
it's coattails.
Too early to tell. Right now it's a mooch, but that's one episode, and even by our own standards, that's too early to tell.
Let's say there's a free episode. There's a free episode on HBO. Okay, you watch your free episodes. Episode 1, season 2.
I'm not subscribing to
Don't
HBO.
subscribe.
No, I'm not subscribing to
Exactly.
HBO. Yeah.
Exactly. That's the hard part, right? Apple TV Plus does this with a lot of shows. They say, okay, the first one free. And you watch that one, you're like, oh man, I have got to watch this. $7.99 a month. I am in. Credit card, Apple Pay, double click. You're like, I got to watch this. This is an amazing show, right?
Yeah.
HBO? Nah, disappointing. All right.
Triple pivot, The Veil.
The Veil, which is totally unforeseen by you and me.
Yeah.
You want to give the background of the synopsis? Yeah, it came out of nowhere.
It's another, I hesitate to use the word another, but it is another espionage drama series. It's about, spies, and it's kind of like a thriller. It seems lower stakes, even though it absolutely isn't. Elizabeth Moss stars a very blonde, very British accent, Elizabeth Moss. So that was a bit of a shocker for me.
Yeah.
So it's only 6 episodes. It's a mini series. I blew through all 6 episodes. I don't know about you, but I binged it all.
We found this it's on Disney Plus, right? Because of Hulu.
Yeah, exactly.
Elizabeth Moss, who is very well known for
Handmaid's Tale, West Wing, right? Mad Men.
Has another show on Hulu or FX, I guess it is, called The Veil. It is a spy thriller. She does play a British MI5 agent. And I would describe it as this. I really like the show. I also blew through all the episodes. And I think it's because Elizabeth Moss, and I say this absolutely in the nicest possible way. Please don't take any assholeness out of this. She is not a Margot Robbie natural beauty, but her on-screen presence is undeniable.
Formidable.
If someone says, like, what do you mean by on-screen presence? You watch her and you're like, I really like her. Even though you take a step back, you're like, nah, she's not really my type. Like, she's not, this poster pinup girl like Margot Robbie. She's not going to be cast as Barbie or something like this. But you're like, I don't know. There's something about her. Like, I'm kind of falling in love with her, like she has a great, great presence, right? And we've seen this from The Handmaid's Tale and now in this and Mad Men. I agree with you that I think the production value of this is great. I think from a technical perspective, this is a superb show. Storyline wise, when you really get into the nitty gritty, it's not really a timeless story that's
kind of a generic story,
new and novel.
Yeah.
It's kind of a generic story, and it's supposed to be big stakes, but realistically, I think it's kind of small stakes. As you have taught me, kind of the B plot to this, the personal issues, I think are at best, right? There's always some daddy issues, and it just kind of like, I don't know, I felt like a little bit diminishing at the end, like, it's always about the dad, right?
Yeah.
Like, I don't know, it just seemed kind of...
And they set it up in such a way that if they want to make a second series, they can.
In terms of the moment-by-moment action, I think that characters, the casting, fantastic. the way that it is paced and the drama and the suspense, I think, are fantastic. I think it's got a very, very realistic feel to it. You know, she's a little bit of a Jason Bourne, hey, I can beat anyone in hand-to-hand combat. A little bit too much for my liking, but generally I found that she's more clever in a very realistic way and isn't just all, hey, I can, fight anybody straight up and choke them out. So I found that very realistic, which is important to me or critical to me when I'm watching a show like this, right?
Yeah.
For me, it really bothers me when there's this one, right? Jason Bourne, a great example, that like anyone he comes across at any time, no matter how injured or, winded he is,
he can come out on top no matter what.
He can come out on top, right? I found it very realistic. Again, the overall big event that everyone is trying to prevent, the dirty bomb, I felt was a little bit.
Felt a bit Jack Ryan.
Yeah, it felt a little bit Jack Ryan, but I mean, we're going to do spoilers in this, right?
We always do.
The dirty bomb is great, centerpiece, but I felt how they got the dirty bomb was really boring. It's just a X-ray machine. Don't we have like a million X-ray machines in America or UK or like, why do you have to go through all this effort? Why don't you just like break into a hospital and like take the stuff out of the X-ray machine? I actually researched it online. Don't go down this rabbit hole of Reddit, but apparently this is not an X-ray machine. It's a chemotherapy machine. It's a real thing. A few other people also asked, like, okay, let's pick a random town in the US, Wichita, Kansas. Okay. There's gotta be a chemotherapy machine in Wichita, Kansas. No one's really guarding that machine at night. Is there anything stopping people from just breaking into the hospital and taking a screwdriver? Because that's apparently all it takes.
Yeah.
And like taking out that core and like putting it into then like the lead box with water. And everyone's like, no, anyone could do that. Okay. So why are we going through all this effort? Yeah, I mean, it's a bit frightening, but at the same time, like, why are we going through all this effort, this vast plot to like recruit these two guys and go into the room, and then they're going to get blind, and then you got to take the box in the truck and the truck to the ship and the ship to the, like, seems like not the most efficient way to do what they're trying to do, right?
No, absolutely. But again, I think that
it wasn't a nuclear warhead. It was a chemotherapy machine.
So I think that's the thing also, is that this wasn't really about that.
No.
The show really clearly wasn't about that. I mean, of course it was. It was about them trying to stop a dirty bomb. But the dirty bomb was, I wasn't ever concerned that it was ever going to blow up.
No,
at no point was I thinking that. It was more the quest of how Elizabeth Moss is going to prevent it from happening, not the actual event itself.
Yeah. Yeah. It's her as it always is, the lone British agent, right?
As the rogue spy, right?
Like, does she not have any accountability?
Does she not have any British colleagues?
I agree.
What is happening? The entire time she's like, oh, I'm embedded with the French Secret Service.
Yeah, literally.
The American CIA.
Wah, wah. Yeah.
And no one from England, like not a single agent that we see from MI5 or MI6.
Yeah. I think it would have been look, I love the show, by the way, but that doesn't mean that it's above any type of criticism.
Oh, yeah,
I love the show I love the show for all the reasons that we just discussed. I love the casting, dialogue, pacing, all the technical elements are 100% there. But the story, I think, is pretty flimsy. And I think it could have been a much more compelling story if we would have said, hey, wait a second. The US, wants to assassinate this person. The Brits want to get the information from this person. And the French are like, hey, this is a citizen. We're not going to allow this person to be like kidnapped or interrogated on French soil. If you've got this three-way battle for this person, that seems a little bit more compelling to me. Because the current one was, and I do like the U.S. agent and how anti-French he was.
Yeah.
I have to say, that definitely landed with me.
The most
Right?
American
And that
American
guy,
that's ever Americaned.
that guy played that role very well. And in a way, he wasn't actually wrong, right?
Yeah.
but I like that three-way battle where everyone's got slightly misaligned interests and there's a lot of like back and forth double agenting. I thought that would have been a better storyline than what we currently had, which was Elizabeth Moss. Not clear why the UK was involved. And again, it seemed like she had no adult supervision. The US and, France clearly had their own positions. But again, it's not clear why France was cooperating only with Elizabeth Moss on this.
Yeah.
The overall storyline I felt was a little bit weak. When you add in her daddy issues, it became like kind of tired for me. Like,
Yeah.
I find it to be very sexist when every strong woman's motivation is somehow seated in this deep daddy issue. I mean, that's the only thing you can call it, is a daddy issue, right? I find that to be deeply, deeply sexist, and I don't know why they do it, which is all the flashbacks and my father, I thought he was dead and I need to clear his name, and I'm only in this line of business because he was in this line of business, and nothing else matters to me. I'm not capable of forming deep relationships or hobbies or anything. Like, it seems so psychologically basic that the strong silent type is only because I'm chasing after my father's ghost, right? And then surprise, surprise, he's been alive the whole time. Spoiler alert. And surprise, surprise, now he was working for the Russians. I'm going to go either track him down and clear his name, or there's going to be like we saw this in The Old Man.
That's exactly right. With Jeff Bridges.
I'm saying this. I find that to be sexist and a little bit repugnant. That why can't you just be a hero? Why can't you just be like, you know what? The world has some bad people. I'm doing this because I love, my sister and my niece so much. Maybe I lost my brother. Like, there could be another motivation for this, but I felt like the daddy issues, dating the older man, and the older man is actually friends with her dad. Like, the whole thing just became a little bit like
Oedipal. Yeah.
right? But that being said, despite all my criticisms about the story, I love the show and I love the characters. I thought the casting could not have been better for any single character. I thought it was great.
Yeah.
From the American to the French to the lady who played
The Jinn of Al Raqqa.
all of it, I thought was just fantastic. The use of Istanbul was great, made a lot of sense. The camps, the UN worker, everything I thought was just fantastic, fantastic, fantastic.
Yeah. If you like spy shows, if you like spy espionage thrillers, this is the one for you. Like all spy shows and espionage shows, you have to watch at least 2 episodes to really get into it. After I saw the first,
Yep.
I was on the fence, but it was really the second and third episodes that got me into it
Yeah.
fully.
Elizabeth Moss is just so fantastic, though. I'm just, I don't know. It's just really interesting watching her because I feel like she has just this great screen presence and this really comfortable level of confidence, like how
Yeah.
she deals with everybody in that show is just like, she's confident. She can leave things left unsaid. She can give partial answers that don't reveal too much. I thought it was just fantastic writing and fantastic by her.
Agreed. 100% agreed. And thank you for that recommendation because I would never have watched this show otherwise.
I wouldn't have either. I think it's definitely coming back for a second season.
Could very well be.
They left it wide open for a very natural,
Exactly.
just like The Old Man. The Old Man left it so wide open for another season, right?
Yeah.
That it would be really disappointing if they didn't do it.
Yeah. In the meantime, if you guys have strong feelings on The Acolyte, on The Veil, on House of the Dragon, tweet at us at FNS Podcast, DM us on Instagram at Films and Stuff Podcast, and as always, leave a comment below, like this video,
Ring the bell.
subscribe to our channel, all that YouTube jazz. It helps us out greatly.
Love it when you say YouTube, Jazz. All right, Pete, it has been a pleasure on this Saturday afternoon. Listeners, thanks for tuning in, and we will see you next week on the Films and Stuff podcast.
Thanks, Ethan.
Bye, everyone.
Thank you for listening to another episode of Films and Stuff. If you haven't already, please subscribe and review on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, or wherever podcasts are downloaded. Films and Stuff. There is no substitute.